Hello, brothers and sisters. Have you ever watched a small flame seemingly dance in the wind, bending and twisting but never truly going out? Our hearts are much like that flame, vulnerable to the winds of manipulation and misunderstanding, yet capable of shining brightly and steadily when sheltered by God's truth. Today, we will explore a path that demands discernment, courage, and complete surrender, how we respond to the narcissists in our lives without losing our inner peace or falling into their subtle traps. This is a challenging but necessary journey, so that we can protect our hearts and live a life according to God's will. In life, there are moments when the instinct to call out a narcissist seems almost irresistible. We want to expose their distortions, seek justice, and demand accountability for their wrongdoings. But what if this very confrontation pulls us deeper into a web of frustration and confusion? What if God's wisdom points us to a different path, one that does not lead us through the storm, but instead lifts us above it? In His Word, and in the insightful wisdom of thinkers like C.S. Lewis, we will find the guidance we need to protect our hearts and trust that God will fight the battles we cannot win alone. The Bible clearly teaches us that the Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. Exodus 14 verse 14. This stillness is not passivity, but a powerful act of faith. It is a decision to trust in divine justice rather than human confrontation, a decision to set boundaries that respect our own value, and to seek a peace that surpasses all our understanding. It's a surrender, complete submission into the hands of God. My dear friends, beloved by God, have you ever faced someone who, when you try to present the truth, turns your words into a distorted reflection in a broken mirror? You entered the conversation hoping for clarity and understanding, but left with a cloud of confusion, guilt, and disappointment. There is a profound lesson here, one that speaks to both spiritual discernment and an understanding of human behavior. Directly confronting a narcissist often leads to undesirable outcomes, toxic outcomes that drain your soul rather than restore it. In these moments, you may feel righteous indignation, the desire to expose their manipulation, or to demand fairness. But that confrontation, instead of bringing truth to light, only spirals deeper into chaos. The person you confront may launch defensive attacks, twist your good intentions, or even cause you to doubt your own reality. It's like trying to grasp a shadow. The more you chase it, the more elusive it becomes. You feel like a victim of your own good intentions, caught in an emotional whirlwind with no escape. C.S. Lewis, in The Screwtape Letters, reminded us that the enemy often turns our good desires into subtle traps. Your rightful need for accountability can become an open door for emotional and spiritual harm if it is not approached with discernment. This does not mean we condone or excuse the narcissist's behavior, absolutely not. But attempting to communicate directly with them, expecting change through confrontation, often leads to more harm than good. The demonic traps of emotional manipulation thrive in such interactions, and you will find yourself caught in a web of frustration, guilt, and false hopes. The Bible also offers deep wisdom for these challenging situations. Proverbs 26 verse 4 warns us, "Do not answer a fool according to his folly, or you yourself will be just like him." Exposing a narcissist might seem like a necessary step toward justice, but it can quickly turn into a pointless argument where you lose your peace of God and damage your own well-being. Instead of resolving anything, you only become more drained and your spirit is harmed by their constant denial to take responsibility. God calls us not to be passive, but to be wise. There is a great power in recognizing that some battles are not ours to fight directly. By refusing to engage in their cycle of distortion and defensiveness, you are reclaiming your own peace, and refusing to allow them to have power over your spirit. This is not weakness, but rather wisdom and spiritual self-preservation. When you leave a confrontation, you're not abandoning justice, but instead, you are stepping towards divine intervention, trusting that God will handle what you cannot resolve on your own. This subtle but important shift opens the door to healthier choices and stronger boundaries, and perhaps, my friends, in that very choice, the path to the freedom we all long for will be revealed. So, what can we expect from those who refuse to take responsibility, and what patterns of behavior should we recognize in them? Have you ever noticed that the more you seek understanding or reconciliation, the more the narcissist distorts the reality you are trying to clarify? It's like standing in a room full of mirrors, where each reflection is slightly off, leaving you feeling confused and unsettled. They constantly blame, twist the truth, and refuse to take responsibility, making a healthy relationship impossible. You start to doubt not only their words, but your own perception of reality. Your sense of self is gradually eroded by their unyielding narratives. This pattern is not accidental, but rather a calculated strategy to keep you disoriented and vulnerable. When they refuse to admit fault, they force you into a cycle of self-doubt. You begin to wonder if you're the one who is too sensitive, too demanding, or even controlling. But deep within your spirit, truth whispers, this is not a genuine misunderstanding, but a carefully designed manipulation to keep the power in their hands. Such relentless behavior is a form of emotional imprisonment, depleting your strength and clouding your judgment. C.S. Lewis wisely observed that evil is often mundane and repetitive. In The Screwtape Letters, a senior demon instructed his protege to use subtle but persistent distortions to weaken a believer. These small but consistent manipulations can lead us to emotional and spiritual exhaustion. Narcissists use a similar approach, a continuous erosion of truth and trust, for refusal to face their own flaws, so that you are left carrying burdens that were never yours to bear. The Bible also sheds light on such behavior. Isaiah 5 verse 20 says, "Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter." The refusal of a narcissist to take responsibility reverses reality, making peace and restoration impossible. You may desire reconciliation, but with a person who is committed to distorting the truth, that reconciliation remains an illusion. In these interactions, it's important to remember that you are not responsible for fixing someone who refuses to see their own brokenness. God does not call you to shoulder that impossible burden. He calls you to clarity, discernment, and to the quiet strength of knowing when to step back. But what happens when you confront these distortions, only to be met with manipulative defenses? Imagine a man trying to plant a tree on rocky ground. At first, the tree seems promising, with green leaves and branches reaching towards the sky. But beneath the surface, its roots have no space to grow. When the wind comes, it doesn't just bend, but it breaks. Confronting a narcissist is much the same. You offer truth hoping it will take root, but the rocky ground of their heart rejects it. Instead of growth, they respond with resistance, twisting your words, deflecting blame, and turning the spotlight on your faults. Their defensiveness is like a polished shield to blind you rather than protect them. When you try to address a problem, they might accuse you of being controlling or say that you are the source of their stress. Your genuine desire for a solution becomes a weapon in their hands, used to make you feel guilty, unreasonable, or even abusive. This is not a dialogue of two souls seeking truth, but rather a performance designed to protect their fragile sense of superiority. C.S. Lewis often spoke of the dangers of pride, that great sin that twists noble things into self-serving ones. In The Great Divorce, a character clung so tightly to their self-justifications that they could not enter heaven's light. Similarly, a narcissist's manipulative responses serve to protect their ego even at the cost of truth, intimacy, and spiritual growth. They would rather distort reality than admit fault, because vulnerability feels like annihilation to them. The scriptures speak clearly of this behavior. In Proverbs 21 verse 2 we read, "Every way of a man is right in his own eyes, but the Lord weighs the heart." A narcissist's defensiveness is not just about avoiding blame, but rather a desperate attempt to uphold an illusion, and the more you engage, the more you will find yourself drawn into their cycle of distortion and frustration. So what can a person do when every honest attempt at resolution is turned against them? There is wisdom in realizing that some ground is too hardened for fruitful discussion, and when the soil of their heart remains stubbornly unyielding, we must consider whether we are truly called to labor there. Perhaps the cycle of frustration you are facing is not meant to be broken by confrontation, but instead by stepping away and finding solid ground. A builder once set out to construct a house on shifting sands. Every day, he adjusted the walls, reinforced the beams, and added supports, yet no matter how much effort he put into it, the foundation remained unstable. The walls leaned, the floors buckled, and the roof sagged. The more he worked, the more exhausted he became, until he realized that his labor was in vain. The foundation itself was the problem. Trying to build a healthy relationship with a narcissist is much like this. The ground beneath you is always shifting, and the harder you try to repair the damage, the more you lose yourself in the process. Every effort to address issues only leads to more frustration. Narcissists refuse to acknowledge their mistakes, and when apologies come, they are empty, merely words without substance or change. They cling to their distorted narratives because, for them, admitting fault is a threat to the fragile facade they have built. This cycle of denial and manipulation becomes a trap, where your energy is spent trying to fix what was never meant to stand. C.S. Lewis understood the futility of trying to reason with those who cling to their self-made delusions. In The Screwtape Letters, an elder demon advises humans to keep focused on fruitless efforts, knowing that exhaustion weakens the spirit. The enemy delights in watching us pour our hearts into hopeless tasks, because it distracts us from the true work of the soul, growing in faith, discernment, and peace. The Bible speaks of the danger of futile efforts in Matthew 7 verse 6, "Do not give dogs what is sacred, do not throw your pearls to pigs. If you do, they may trample them under their feet, and turn and tear you to pieces." When your attempts to bring truth and resolution are repeatedly rejected, it is a sign that the soil is not ready, and that the effort is being wasted. Instead of building up the relationship, you are left defending yourself against attacks that leave you drained and disoriented. There is wisdom in knowing when to step back. The cycle will not break through confrontation or effort alone. Sometimes, the only way to find peace is to stop trying to build on unstable ground. When the sands beneath your feet refuse to hold firm, it may be time to seek the solid foundation that only God can provide. A traveler once sought to cross a desert where the sands were constantly moving. Each step felt uncertain because the ground beneath him would not hold. He could never place his foot firmly, and though the horizon promised safety, the instability underneath made progress impossible. A relationship with a narcissist is much like this perilous journey, unpredictable, unstable, and exhausting. Their behavior changes with their immediate needs, making any sense of security fleeting. In such relationships, promises are made but rarely kept, apologies are given, but they are performances rather than acts of repentance. When their needs shift, so does their behavior, leaving you perpetually off balance. You may try to build trust, to create a bond rooted in understanding, but their ever-changing nature prevents anything solid from taking form. You are left wondering if you are walking towards stability, or merely circling back to the same shifting patterns of confusion. C.S. Lewis wrote about the danger of illusions and false foundations in Mere Christianity. He reminds us that anything built on a lie will eventually collapse. The narcissist's reality is one of self-preservation, where truth bends to serve their ego. If they sense their control slipping, they will reshape the narrative to restore their sense of superiority. This constant shifting keeps you in a state of anxiety, forever questioning what is real and what is fabrication. The words of Jesus in Matthew 7 verse 26 are clear, "But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand." Building a relationship with someone who refuses to acknowledge the truth is like constructing on shifting sand. The foundation will never hold, and the walls of hope you raise will inevitably crumble under the weight of their inconsistency. But God calls us to solid ground, to relationships rooted in truth, humility, and love. He offers a foundation that does not change with the winds of ego or the storms of pride. When you find yourself caught in the shifting sands of manipulation, remember that true stability comes from standing on God's unchanging word. For when we cease striving to build where the ground is unstable, we open ourselves to the firm foundation of divine wisdom and peace. There was once a hunter who set a trap so cleverly hidden that even the wisest of creatures would stumble into it. The bait was enticing, a glimmer of hope, a promise of resolution. But once the prey took that step, the snare tightened, and escape seemed impossible. Confronting a narcissist with the hope of fixing them or exposing their lies is like stepping into such a trap. What seems like a path to healing becomes a web of emotional and spiritual entanglement. The more you focus on fixing their behavior or revealing their deception, the deeper you fall into the negativity they create. The narcissist's tactics, gaslighting, blame shifting, and emotional manipulation tighten the snare around you, consuming your peace and distorting your perception of reality. You may begin to question your worth, your discernment, and even your relationship with God. This is the enemy's goal, to keep you trapped, distracted, and spiritually depleted. C.S. Lewis, in The Screwtape Letters, illustrates how demons delight in keeping us focused on the faults of others while neglecting our own souls. By making us obsess over someone else's lies or toxicity, they pull us away from God's light and truth. This obsession becomes a spiritual trap, where our minds and hearts are consumed by frustration, bitterness, or despair. The more we wrestle with the darkness, the more it envelops us. The Apostle Paul warns us in 2 Corinthians 2 verse 11 to be aware of Satan's schemes, so that we would not be outwitted by Satan, for we are not ignorant of his designs. The demonic trap here is subtle. It invites you to fight for justice, but in a way that drains your soul and undermines your faith. The battle you think you are waging for truth becomes a battleground where your own peace and safety are at risk. But God does not ask you to entangle yourself in this endless struggle. Instead, He offers a way out, a path of discernment and surrender. By stepping away and giving the situation to Him, you avoid the trap and preserve your soul. For when we resist the urge to fix what only God can heal, we step into the freedom that He alone can give. A gardener knows that some weeds are so deeply rooted that pulling them out by force will only damage the surrounding soil. Instead, he cuts off their access to light and water, allowing nature to wither them away. In dealing with a narcissist, God offers similar wisdom. Sometimes, the best approach is not confrontation, but withdrawal of the emotional resources that enable their behavior. The biblical path calls us to break unhealthy bonds, resist codependency, and entrust the situation to God's hands. God does not call us to endlessly confront those who refuse to change. Instead, He invites us to guard our hearts and set boundaries that reflect our worth in His eyes. In Galatians 5 verse 1, it says, "It is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Stand firm, then, and do not let yourselves be burdened again by a yoke of slavery." The cycle of manipulation and distortion is a form of bondage. By stepping back, you break free from this toxic yoke and reclaim the freedom Christ offers. C.S. Lewis once wrote that relying on God has to begin all over again every day, as if nothing had yet been done. This daily surrender is key. Instead of expending energy on fruitless confrontation, we surrender the narcissist to God's justice. His ways are higher, His timing perfect. Where our interventions fail, God's intervention prevails. He sees every manipulation, every distortion, and every hurt. Trusting Him means believing that He will handle the situation far better than we ever could. Breaking codependent patterns is not about giving up on love or compassion. It is about recognizing that true love respects boundaries and honors the image of God within you. When you resist the urge to fix someone who refuses responsibility, you honor both your dignity and God's sovereignty. This is not weakness, it is spiritual strength rooted in trust. In choosing God's path, you allow Him to work behind the scenes in ways you cannot see, and as you step away from confrontation, you begin to walk toward a peace and freedom that only God's wisdom can provide. A bird trapped in a snare struggles fiercely, exhausting itself in vain. But when it finally stops fighting and waits, the hand of its rescuer gently loosens the trap, setting it free. In the same way, peace and freedom are often found not through relentless struggle, but through the quiet strength of surrender and boundaries. When you step away from the toxic cycle, you make space for God's hand to release you from the emotional snares of a narcissist's manipulation. God's wisdom teaches us that true peace is not the absence of conflict, but the presence of clarity and boundaries. In Philippians 4 verse 7, we read, "And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. This peace isn't born of confrontation, but of trust that God will guard your heart when you set healthy limits and refuse to be drawn into endless cycles of blame and distortion. Setting boundaries is an act of self-respect and faith. It means recognizing your worth in God's eyes and protecting the spiritual gifts He has entrusted to you. When you say no to toxic behavior, you say yes to God's peace. It is in this space of freedom that you can rebuild your spirit, regain your clarity, and walk in the truth of who God created you to be. C.S. Lewis once noted that a man can no more diminish God's glory by refusing to worship Him than a lunatic can put out the sun by scribbling darkness on the walls of his cell. The narcissist's attempts to distort your reality do not change the truth of who you are. By stepping back, you refuse to let their darkness define you, and you reclaim the light of God's truth, where peace and freedom flourish. This journey of setting boundaries and trusting God is not an easy one. But as you walk it, you will find that the weight of guilt, confusion, and frustration begins to lift, and in that newfound freedom, you discover a life no longer bound by their chaos, but anchored in God's unshakable peace. Dear friends, the journey of dealing with a narcissist is not an easy one. The traps of manipulation, the distortion of reality, and the endless cycle of confrontation can leave you exhausted and disheartened. But God, in His wisdom, offers you a better way. He invites you to step back, set boundaries, and trust Him to bring justice in His perfect timing. Remember that your worth is not determined by someone else's behavior or twisted perceptions. Your identity is anchored in God's truth. In Psalm 62 verse 6, it says, "He alone is my rock and my salvation, He is my fortress, I will not be shaken." When you set your boundaries and give the struggle to God, you are not giving up, you are standing firm on the unshakable foundation of His peace. As you walk forward, I encourage you to reflect on your relationships. Are you pouring energy into a cycle that God is asking you to step away from? Have you mistaken confrontation for healing when God is offering you freedom through surrender? If this message spoke to you, let us know in the comment with the declaration, "I choose God's peace over toxic chaos." Share this message with those who may need encouragement, and don't forget to like and subscribe to stay connected with more content of faith and wisdom. May God's peace and discernment guide you today and always.